Her phone was removed from the family account on October 14th, 3 days after the welfare check found her apartment empty. Verizon records confirmed the device was deactivated at 2:47 p.m. that afternoon. The IMEI was flagged as no longer associated with an active line. Standard procedure. On October 19th, the family's shared location history logged the phone at a bus stop on Carver Street. Stationary, 4 minutes, then marked as active. The device had no service, no SIM, no way to ping cell towers or connect to GPS satellites. The entry exists anyway. Megan Ashby was 26 years old. She worked as a dental hygienist at a practice in Riverside. Her apartment was a one-bedroom unit on the second floor of a complex called Willow Creek Gardens, which had neither willows nor gardens, just 3 beige buildings arranged around a parking lot that flooded when it rained. Her mother, Diane, was the one who requested the welfare check. Megan had missed 2 shifts at work. She wasn't answering texts. Her car was in the lot, but no one had seen her leave the building. The responding officer noted that the front door was locked. The chain was not engaged. The apartment showed no signs of forced entry, no signs of struggle. Dishes in the sink, a half-empty glass of water on the nightstand. The bed was made. Megan's purse was on the kitchen counter. Her wallet was inside. Her keys were in a bowl by the door. Her phone was not recovered. The officer's report describes the apartment as undisturbed. He used that word 3 times. Diane filed a missing persons report the same evening. The case was assigned number MP 2023-4471. The first anomalous location entry appeared 5 days later. Diane had kept the family plan active. She'd been paying for Megan's line since college, just one of those things that never got switched over. The shared location feature had always been enabled. Megan used to joke about it, said her mother was keeping tabs on her like she was still in high school. Diane was scrolling through her phone on the night of October 19th when she noticed the notification. Location updated. She assumed it was a glitch, maybe a cached entry from before Megan disappeared. But the timestamp was current. 9:23 p.m. That evening. The pin was at a bus stop on Carver Street, about 2 miles from Megan's apartment. Duration, 4 minutes. Then the status changed to active, which in Verizon's system means the device is currently transmitting. Diane called the number. It went straight to a recording. The number you have dialed is not in service. She drove to Carver Street anyway. The bus stop was empty. Just a bench and a sign and a flickering street light. She sat there for an hour, watching. Nothing. The location history for Megan's device between October 14th and October 19th shows no activity. 5 days of nothing. The phone was off the grid. Then, on the 19th, Carver Street. On the 20th, the parking lot of a grocery store on Maple Avenue. 3 minutes, active. On the 21st, a park bench near the downtown library. 7 minutes, active. On the 22nd, the sidewalk outside Megan's dental office, stationary for 11 minutes during the lunch hour. Diane reported each location to the police. They sent officers to check. Each site was empty. No phone, no Megan, no evidence anyone had been there at all. The detective assigned to the case, Detective Marcus Webb, noted in his file that the locations appeared to trace a rough pattern. Each one was somewhere Megan had been before, places from her regular routine. But the pattern wasn't exact. The grocery store was one she'd stopped going to months ago after they renovated and moved the produce section. The park bench was one she'd sat on during a lunch break in July, just once, during a week when her car was in the shop. Specific locations, but not current ones. Old ones. Verizon's technical support team reviewed the account 3 times at Diane's request. Their findings were consistent across all 3 reviews. The device associated with Megan's line had been deactivated on October 14th. The deactivation was logged correctly. No SIM card was active. No cellular connection had been established since that date. But the location entries were real. They weren't cached. They weren't delayed uploads from before the deactivation. Each one was generated in real time, stamped with the current date and time, transmitted through Verizon's servers like any normal location ping. The technical explanation, according to the 3rd review, was that this should not be possible. The representative Diane spoke with used that exact phrasing. He said, "Ma'am, I'm looking at your account right now, and I can see the entries, but I also can see that the device isn't connected. It hasn't been connected in over a week. I don't have an explanation for you. This should not be possible." He offered to escalate the issue to their engineering team. 3 weeks later, Diane received a form letter stating that the matter had been reviewed and no further action was warranted. The letter did not mention the location entries. It did not mention Megan. By November 1st, there had been 14 location pings. Each one corresponded to a place Megan had visited at some point in her life. Not recent visits. Not obvious ones. The correlation was specific and unsettling. The 5th ping was at a gas station in Bakersville, 40 miles outside the city. Megan had stopped there once, 3 years earlier during a road trip. She'd mentioned it to Diane at the time because the bathroom was filthy and she'd had to use the one at the Wendy's next door instead. The 8th ping was at a playground in a neighborhood Megan had never lived in, but Diane recognized the address. It was where Megan's best friend from elementary school had lived before her family moved away in 4th grade. The 11th ping was at a cemetery. Specifically, at the grave of Megan's grandmother, who had died when Megan was 14. Diane visited that one in person. The headstone was undisturbed. The grass was overgrown. There was no phone lying in the weeds. There was nothing at all. On November 3rd, the pattern changed. The location ping that morning was not a place Megan had ever been. It was the home address of a woman named Patricia Vance. Patricia was 62 years old, retired, lived alone in a house on Sycamore Lane. She had no connection to Megan, no mutual friends, no shared workplaces or social circles. The two had never met. The ping lasted 19 minutes. The device was marked as active the entire time. Diane didn't know who Patricia Vance was. She only found out because she drove to the location and knocked on the door. Patricia answered. She was polite, but confused. She'd never heard of Megan Ashby. She'd lived in that house for 8 years. Nothing unusual had happened that morning. No visitors, no strange noises, no one lurking outside. She let Diane walk around the yard. There was nothing there. The next 3 pings were also at unfamiliar addresses. The first was a storage facility on the edge of town. The second was an abandoned shopping center that had been closed for renovations since 2019. The third was a residential street in a subdivision that hadn't finished construction. Most of the lots were still empty. Just foundations and framing and orange construction fencing. None of these were places Megan had ever been. At least, not as far as Diane knew. Detective Webb ran background checks on the addresses. The storage facility had no units rented under Megan's name or any name associated with her. The shopping center was owned by a development company based in Delaware. There was no connection to Megan or her workplace. The subdivision was being built by a contractor Megan had never worked with, never visited, never interacted with in any documented way. The pings kept coming. 2 or 3 per day now, each lasting between 4 and 20 minutes, each at a different location. Some familiar, some completely unknown. The familiar ones were getting older, more obscure. The location on November 8th was a Denny's that had closed in 2016. The location on November 9th was the address of Megan's childhood home, a house her family had moved out of when she was 9 years old. On November 11th, Diane received a text message from Megan's number. The number was still deactivated. The line was still flagged as out of service. The text came through anyway. It said, "Still here," 2 words, no punctuation, all lowercase. Diane tried to reply. The message failed to send. She called the number. "Same recording as before. The number you have dialed is not in service." She screenshot the message and brought it to Detective Webb. He forwarded it to Verizon's fraud department. They confirmed that the text had been sent from Megan's device, or at least from a device spoofing Megan's number. But the transmission didn't go through any of their cell towers. It didn't route through their servers. It appeared in Diane's inbox without any corresponding record in the carrier's system. The fraud department's report stated that this was technically inconsistent with our network architecture. They recommended Diane change her phone number as a precaution. She didn't. The second text came on November 14th. "You keep looking." The third came on November 16th. Wrong places. Each one arrived in the middle of the night. 2:47 a.m., 3:12 a.m., 3:33 a.m. Diane stopped sleeping. She sat in her living room with her phone in her hand, waiting. The messages never came while she was watching. On November 18th, the location pings started appearing at places that didn't exist. Not places that had been demolished or closed, places with no corresponding physical location at all. The GPS coordinates were valid. They pointed to real points on the map. But when cross-referenced with satellite imagery and municipal records, the locations were empty fields, undeveloped lots, stretches of highway with nothing on either side. The first of these phantom pings was at coordinates that corresponded to a patch of scrubland about 15 miles outside the city. Diane drove out there. It was exactly what the satellite showed. Dry grass, a few scattered trees, a rusted fence post with no fence attached. The phone's location had been marked as active at that spot for 47 minutes. There was nothing there, not even tire tracks in the dirt. Detective Webb closed the missing persons case on November 22nd. Not officially closed, reclassified. The case was moved to inactive status pending new evidence. This was standard procedure for cases with no leads and no suspects. It didn't mean they'd stopped looking, it just meant they'd stopped looking actively. Diane understood. She didn't blame Webb. There was nothing for him to investigate. No crime scene, no witnesses, no body, just a phone that wouldn't stop moving. The location entries continued through December. The intervals became irregular. Sometimes 3 pings in a single day, sometimes nothing for a week. The durations varied wildly, some as short as 30 seconds, others lasting several hours. The longest was on December 9th. The phone was marked as active at a location for 6 hours and 12 minutes. The coordinates pointed to a reservoir about an hour north of the city. Search and rescue divers checked the reservoir 3 days later at Diane's request and expense. They found nothing. No phone, no remains. Nothing at all except cold water and sediment. On December 15th, the texts started including coordinates: 374219, 122.0841. Diane didn't recognize the location. She plugged it into Google Maps. It was the headquarters of a tech company in Mountain View, California, 2,300 miles away. She couldn't explain why Megan's phone, or whatever was pretending to be Megan's phone, would reference a location on the other side of the country. There was no connection. Megan had never been to California. She didn't know anyone who worked in tech. The next text, 2 days later, included different coordinates. These pointed to a location in rural Montana, a stretch of forest with no roads, no buildings, no apparent significance. The third set of coordinates pointed to a spot in the Atlantic Ocean, about 200 miles off the coast of Maine. None of the coordinates corresponded to the location pings in the family account. They seemed to be separate, unrelated, just numbers sent in the dark. By January, Diane had accumulated over 200 location entries. She'd mapped them all, printed out the list, highlighted the ones that corresponded to places Megan had actually been, and left the rest unmarked. The ratio was shifting. In October and early November, most of the pings were recognizable. Old haunts, forgotten stops, places with at least some connection to Megan's life. Now, fewer than 1 in 5 had any identifiable link to her daughter. The rest were random, scattered across the city and beyond. Residential addresses, commercial properties, empty lots, highway rest stops, no pattern, no logic, just movement. On January 4th, a location ping appeared at Diane's own address. Duration, 8 minutes. Status, active. Diane was home at the time. She was sitting at her kitchen table drinking coffee, looking at her phone when the notification came through. She walked through every room in the house, checked the closets, checked the garage, checked the yard. Nothing. The phone was marked as being inside her home for 8 minutes, and she never saw a thing. The next ping at her address came on January 7th. This time it lasted 2 hours. Diane sat perfectly still in her living room for the entire duration. She watched the location marker on her screen. It didn't move. It stayed fixed on her house, on her coordinates, for 120 minutes. She heard nothing. She saw nothing. The house was silent. When the status finally changed to inactive, she searched the house again. Still nothing. On January 12th, Patricia Vance, the woman from Sycamore Lane, the one with no connection to Megan, called the police to report a disturbance. She said she'd been hearing sounds in her attic for the past 3 days. Scratching, tapping, something moving around up there. The responding officer checked the attic. It was empty. No animals. No intruders. No evidence anyone had been up there in months. But Patricia mentioned something else. She said she'd been getting strange notifications on her phone. Location alerts she didn't recognize. Her phone kept telling her that a device called Megan's iPhone was nearby. Patricia didn't have Find My Friends enabled. She didn't have any family members on a shared location plan. She didn't know how the notification was appearing or why it referenced someone named Megan. The officer noted this in his report. He also noted that Patricia Vance's address had appeared in the location history of a missing person's phone back in November. He flagged the report for Detective Webb. Webb reopened the case on January 14th. Or rather, he reclassified it again. It wasn't a missing persons case anymore. He didn't know what to call it. The file was moved to a category reserved for incidents that didn't fit standard classifications. There were now multiple addresses experiencing unexplained phenomena. Patricia Vance, a man named David Okonkwo, whose home had pinged on November 29th and who'd recently reported finding his back door unlocked 3 mornings in a row. A woman named Jennifer Marks, whose apartment had pinged on December 3rd and who'd complained of her smoke detectors going off repeatedly with no apparent cause. Webb interviewed each of them. None of them knew Megan Ashby. None of them could explain why their homes had appeared in her phone's location history. But all of them reported the same thing, a sense that something was off, sounds they couldn't explain, doors they were sure they'd locked, a feeling of being watched. None of them had seen anything. On January 19th, Diane received a text that was different from the others. It wasn't coordinates. It wasn't a cryptic phrase. It was a photograph. The image showed a room, concrete walls, no windows, a single fluorescent light fixture on the ceiling, the kind you'd see in a basement or a utility closet. The floor was bare. There was nothing else in the frame except a chair. The chair was empty. Diane stared at the image for a long time. She didn't recognize the room. She didn't know where it could be. The text had no caption, no context, just the photograph, sent from a number that wasn't supposed to exist. She showed the image to Detective Webb. He had it analyzed by the department's digital forensics unit. The metadata had been stripped. No location data, no timestamp embedded in the file. The image could have been taken anywhere. The only thing they could determine was that the photograph was recent. The compression artifacts were consistent with a modern smartphone camera. The lighting suggested the image was taken at night. The fluorescent fixture was the only source of illumination, and there was no ambient daylight bleeding in from anywhere. Webb asked Diane if she had any idea what the room might be. She didn't. He asked if Megan had ever mentioned a place like that. A basement, a storage room, an industrial space. Diane couldn't think of anything. On January 22nd, a second photograph arrived. Same room, same angle, same empty chair. But the chair had moved. In the first image, it was positioned in the center of the room, facing the camera directly. In the second image, it was rotated about 45 degrees, angled toward the corner. No one was visible in either photograph. There was no indication of who or what had moved the chair. The third photograph came on January 25th. The chair was closer to the camera now, much closer. It filled most of the frame. The concrete walls were barely visible in the background, and there was something on the seat. Diane enlarged the image, zoomed in as far as her phone would allow. It was a phone, a smartphone, lying face up on the seat of the chair. The screen was lit. There was text visible on the display, but the resolution was too low to read it. Just a bright rectangle with something written on it. Webb sent the image to the forensics unit for enhancement. They managed to sharpen it enough to make out a few details. The phone was an iPhone. The case was purple. Megan had owned a purple phone case. The text on the screen appeared to be a notification. The unit couldn't make out the words, but they could see the format. A banner across the top of the screen, the kind you'd see for a text message or an alert. They couldn't determine who the notification was from or what it said. The fourth photograph arrived on January 28th. The chair was empty again, but the phone was still visible. It had been placed on the floor in the corner of the room, screen facing up. The screen was dark. Behind the chair, barely visible in the shadowed corner, there was something else. Diane had to look at the image for several minutes before she saw it. The lighting was poor. The resolution was grainy. But once she noticed it, she couldn't unsee it. A shape, humanoid, standing in the corner. It was too dark to make out any features. Just an outline, a silhouette, something standing in a corner where nothing should be standing. Webb sent officers to check every abandoned building within a 50-mile radius. Basements, storage units, industrial spaces, anywhere that might match the description of the room in the photographs. They found nothing. The room could have been anywhere. There were no identifying features, no unique markings, nothing that could narrow down the location. It was just concrete and fluorescent light and a chair and something standing in the corner that might not have been anything at all. On February 1st, the location pings stopped. Diane checked her account obsessively, every hour, every few minutes. The last entry was from January 29th, a ping at an address she didn't recognize, duration 4 minutes, status active. After that, nothing. No pings, no texts, no photographs. The phone, or whatever had been pretending to be the phone, had gone silent. Diane waited. February passed. March passed. The case went cold again. Webb had nothing new to report. The analysis of the photographs yielded no actionable leads. The pattern of addresses led nowhere. Diane kept paying for the phone line. She couldn't bring herself to cancel it. It felt like giving up, like admitting that Megan was really gone. The location history remained empty. On April 3rd, Diane received a call. Not a text, not a notification, an actual phone call. The caller ID showed Megan's number. Diane answered immediately. She didn't say anything. She just pressed the phone to her ear and listened. There was breathing on the other end. Slow breathing. Too slow. The inhales lasted longer than they should have, 5 seconds, 6 seconds, drawing in air that never seemed to stop. Diane said Megan's name. The breathing continued. She said it again. There was a sound, not a word, not static, something else. A wet sound, like something being dragged across a damp surface. Then the line went dead. The call lasted 43 seconds. The carrier had no record of it. As far as Verizon's systems were concerned, no call had been placed to Diane's phone at that time. No connection had been established. No data had been transmitted. But Diane's call log showed it clearly. Incoming call, Megan's number, duration 43 seconds. On April 7th, the location pings resumed. But they weren't appearing in the family account anymore. They were appearing on Patricia Vance's phone, and David Okonkwo's phone, and Jennifer Mark's phone, and on the phones of 11 other people whose addresses had appeared in the original location history. All of them, simultaneously, receiving notifications that a device called Megan's iPhone was nearby. Webb interviewed each of them again. Their experiences were consistent. The notifications appeared randomly, usually at night. The phone would buzz, and there would be an alert. Megan's iPhone is near you. But when they looked around, there was nothing there. Some of them reported sounds, footsteps in empty rooms, doors opening and closing, whispers that seemed to come from inside the walls. David Okonkwo said he woke up one night to find all the pictures on his wall hanging upside down. He lived alone. He hadn't touched them. Jennifer Marks said her cat had stopped going into the bedroom. It would sit in the hallway and stare at the closed door for hours. Patricia Vance said she'd started finding things moved in her house. Small things. A coffee mug on the wrong shelf, a book she'd left on the couch turning up in the bathroom, her car keys appearing in the freezer. She said it felt like someone was living in her house with her, someone she couldn't see. On April 12th, Diane received another photograph. Same room, same chair, same concrete walls and fluorescent light. But the angle was different, lower, closer to the ground, and there were more shapes in the corners now. Not just one, 3, 4, maybe more. It was hard to tell where one ended and another began. They weren't standing anymore. They were crouched. The phone on the floor was visible in the corner of the frame. The screen was lit again. This time, the forensics unit could read the notification. It said, "She found you." On April 15th, Patricia Vance was reported missing. Her car was in the driveway. Her purse was on the kitchen counter. Her keys were in a bowl by the door. The responding officer noted that the front door was locked. The chain was not engaged. The apartment showed no signs of forced entry, no signs of struggle. He described the house as undisturbed. Patricia's phone was not recovered. But 3 days later, a new device appeared in Diane's family plan. It was labeled Patricia's iPhone. The first location ping was at Diane's house. Duration, ongoing. Status, active. David Okonkwo reported finding something in his mailbox on April 17th. It wasn't mail, it was a phone, an iPhone with a cracked screen and a case that had once been teal but had faded to a grayish blue. The phone was dead, completely drained, but when David plugged it in and let it charge for an hour, it powered on. The lock screen showed 847 unread notifications, text messages, missed calls, app alerts, all of them dated from March of the previous year. The phone had belonged to a woman named Sandra Chen. She had been reported missing 14 months ago. Her case was still open. Her file was sitting in the same cabinet as Megan Ashby's. David called the police. They took the phone as evidence. Forensics examined it. The battery had degraded significantly, consistent with the phone having been inactive for over a year. The internal logs showed the last time the device had been powered on was March 23rd of the previous year, 2 days before Sandra Chen was reported missing. There was no explanation for how the phone ended up in David Okonkwo's mailbox. No fingerprints, no DNA, nothing. But buried in the camera roll, forensics found something, a photograph, taken March 22nd. The day before the phone went dark. It showed a room with concrete walls, a fluorescent light, a chair in the center. Sandra Chen had disappeared from her apartment in a suburb 30 miles from where Megan lived. Different city. Different police jurisdiction. Different case number. But the similarities were immediate. Sandra's car had been in the lot. Her purse was on the counter. Her keys were by the door. Her apartment showed no signs of forced entry or struggle. Her phone was not recovered. The responding officer had described the apartment as undisturbed. That word again. Detective Webb requested Sandra's case file from the other jurisdiction. It took 3 days to arrive. When it did, he found something that made him sit down. Sandra's phone had also continued pinging after she disappeared. The entries were in her family's location history. Her parents had been on the same carrier plan. The pings had started 4 days after she vanished and continued for 6 weeks before stopping abruptly. The locations included places Sandra had been before: her gym, her workplace, a coffee shop she'd frequented in college, a cemetery where her grandmother was buried. The pattern was identical to Megan's. Webb pulled records from other missing persons cases in the region, cases from the past 5 years where the circumstances matched. No sign of struggle, no evidence of forced entry, personal belongings left behind, phone not recovered. He found 11. 6 of them had location anomalies in the weeks following the disappearance. 4 of those 6 had family members who reported receiving strange text messages from the missing person's number, messages that came through even though the line had been deactivated. One of them, a man named Thomas Riley, missing since 2021, had a sister who reported that his phone had started calling her 3 times in 1 week, always after midnight. She would answer, and there would be nothing but breathing on the other end. Slow breathing. Too slow. She'd recorded one of the calls. The recording was in the case file. Webb listened to it alone in his office at 11 p.m. The audio lasted 53 seconds. For the first 40 seconds, there was only breathing, long, measured inhales that stretched past what seemed humanly possible. Then, in the last 13 seconds, something else. A voice. Faint. Barely audible beneath the breathing. It said a single word. Webb played it back 7 times before he was sure he'd heard it correctly. The word was empty. On April 19th, Jennifer Marks stopped responding to calls. She had been scheduled for a follow-up interview with Detective Webb that afternoon. When she didn't show up, he sent an officer to check on her. Her car was in the driveway. Her purse was on the kitchen counter. Her keys were in a bowl by the door. The officer found the front door unlocked. The chain was not engaged. Jennifer's apartment showed no signs of forced entry, no signs of struggle. The dishes in the sink were clean. The bed was made. Her phone was not recovered. The officer's report described the apartment as undisturbed. 3 people connected to the case had now disappeared. Megan Ashby, Patricia Vance, Jennifer Marks. The only link between them was the location pings. Patricia's address had appeared in Megan's location history. Jennifer's address had appeared 2 weeks later. Webb pulled up the remaining addresses from Megan's history, the ones that hadn't been checked in months. There were 147 unique locations. He started making calls. Of the 147 addresses, 23 belonged to people who could not be reached. Not missing, not officially, but unreachable. Phones going straight to voicemail, employers saying they hadn't shown up to work, neighbors saying they hadn't seen them in days. Webb didn't have the resources to send officers to all 23 addresses. He started with the ones closest to the city center. The first 3 were empty. Same pattern. Cars in driveways, purses on counters, apartments undisturbed, phones not recovered. On April 22nd, Diane received a text that contained only a number. 23. She didn't understand what it meant at first. She showed it to Webb. He stared at it for a long time. 23 unreachable addresses. 23 people who had stopped answering their phones. The next text came 6 hours later. 24. Webb had just confirmed that another address from the list, a man named Kevin Ortiz, whose home had pinged on December 1st, could not be reached. The count continued to climb. 27 on April 24th, 31 on April 26th, 35 on April 28th. Each number corresponded to the running total of addresses connected to Megan's location history, where the resident could not be reached or located. Someone, something, was keeping count. Diane stopped leaving her house. The pings at her address had become constant. Megan's iPhone, Patricia's iPhone. Now others, devices with names she didn't recognize, appearing in her location alerts, all marked as nearby. She could see them on her screen. 5 devices, 7 devices, 12. She couldn't see anyone in her house. She kept the lights on at all times. She stopped sleeping. She sat in her living room with her phone in her hand and watched the numbers climb. On May 1st, Webb received an email. It came from an address he didn't recognize, a string of random characters at a domain that didn't resolve when he tried to look it up. The subject line was blank. The email contained a single attachment, a video file, 47 seconds long. The video showed the room, concrete walls, fluorescent light, the chair in the center, but the chair wasn't empty. There was a woman sitting in it. Her head was bowed. Her hair hung in front of her face, obscuring her features. She was wearing clothes that Webb recognized from a photograph in his case file. Sandra Chen. Missing for 14 months. She was sitting in the chair with her hands in her lap. She wasn't moving. She wasn't breathing, at least, not that the camera could detect. For 30 seconds, nothing happened. Just Sandra, motionless, in the chair. Then, slowly, her head began to lift. The video ended before her face became visible. Webb forwarded the video to the FBI. They traced the email to a server in Eastern Europe that had been offline for 3 years. The IP address didn't exist anymore. There was no way to determine who had sent it or from where. The video itself contained no embedded metadata. The forensics team analyzed the compression, the codec, the frame rate. They concluded that the video had been recorded on a smartphone camera, possibly an iPhone, within the past 6 months. They couldn't determine anything else. On May 3rd, the photographs started arriving at other addresses, not just Diane, everyone who had received location alerts. Everyone whose name appeared in the case files. David Okonkwo received a photograph showing the room from a different angle. The chair was visible in the background. There were more shapes in the corners now, a dozen, maybe more, arranged in a loose semicircle. Thomas Riley's sister received a photograph showing something that might have been a doorway. It was hard to tell. The lighting was too dim. But there was a rectangle of slightly different darkness on one wall, and something seemed to be standing in it. A woman named Maria Santos, whose address had appeared in Megan's location history on November 15th, received a photograph showing the floor of the room. The concrete was stained. The stains formed a pattern, not random splashes, but something deliberate. Something that almost looked like writing. She showed the image to an analyst who specialized in pattern recognition. He spent 3 hours examining it. He concluded that the stains formed words, 3 words, repeated over and over across the floor. Still here, still here, still here, still here, still here. The number in Diane's texts reached 52 on May 5th. 52 addresses, 52 people, 52 apartments and houses and condos where someone had simply stopped existing. The police couldn't keep up. Webb had requested additional resources, but the scope of the case was impossible to explain. How do you write a report about phones that ping from nowhere? About people who vanish without a trace? About photographs that arrive from a room that no one can find? The FBI had taken over parts of the investigation, but they were just as lost. They were treating it as a potential serial abduction case, but there was no evidence of abduction, no witnesses, no suspects, no crime scenes, just absence. On May 7th, Diane's phone showed 23 devices nearby. She was alone in her house. The doors were locked. The windows were closed. The blinds were drawn. 23 devices, 23 phones that had belonged to people who were no longer there. She could hear something now, faint, coming from somewhere inside the walls. A sound like breathing, slow breathing, too slow. She sat very still and listened. The breathing got closer. At 3:17 a.m. on May 8th, a noise woke Diane from the half-sleep she'd fallen into on her couch. A sound from the kitchen. Something being moved. She picked up her phone. The screen showed 24 devices nearby now, one more than before. She walked to the kitchen doorway. She didn't turn on the light. She just looked. Her keys were in the bowl by the door, where they always were, but her purse had been moved. It was on the counter now, positioned exactly in the center. Open. Her wallet, visible inside. She hadn't moved it. She was certain. She hadn't touched her purse in 2 days. The next morning, she received a photograph. The room again. The chair again. But this time, the camera was positioned behind the chair, looking toward where the door would be. The doorway was visible now. It wasn't a doorway at all. It was an opening, a hole in the concrete wall, roughly rectangular, leading into darkness. And standing in that darkness, barely visible, there were shapes. They were arranged in a line, single file, moving through the opening. The photograph had caught them mid-motion. Some were already through, some were still waiting. Diane counted them. 23. She received a text an hour later. Coming home. The location pings at Diane's address stopped on May 9th at 6:43 p.m. Not decreased. Stopped entirely. All 24 devices that had been marked as nearby went dark simultaneously. For the first time in weeks, her phone showed nothing. No alerts, no notifications, no devices nearby. The silence was worse. Detective Webb drove to Diane's house at 7:15 p.m. to check on her. Her car was in the driveway. Her purse was on the kitchen counter. Her keys were in a bowl by the door. The front door was unlocked. The chain was not engaged. The house showed no signs of forced entry, no signs of struggle. The dishes in the sink were clean. The bed was made. Diane's phone was not recovered. Webb walked through every room twice. He checked the closets, the garage, the attic. He found something in the guest bedroom, a phone, a smartphone with a purple case, lying face up on the floor in the corner of the room. The screen was lit. It showed a photograph. The room, the concrete walls, the fluorescent light, the chair. The chair was surrounded now. The shapes weren't in the corners anymore. They were standing in a circle around the chair, pressed close together, filling the frame. And in the center of the chair, barely visible through the crowd of dark figures, there was a woman. Her face was turned toward the camera. Her expression was calm. Her eyes were open. Megan Ashby looked exactly like she had in her missing persons photograph. She was smiling. Webb secured the scene and called for backup. While he waited, he examined the phone more closely. The image on the screen had changed. The shapes had moved. The circle had expanded. There were gaps in it now, openings in the ring of figures. Empty spaces. 24 of them. And the chair was no longer in the center of the room. It was closer to the camera. Much closer. As if it had moved while he was looking away. The notification banner at the top of the screen showed a new message. It said, "Room for more." This documentation was compiled from Detective Webb's case files, carrier records, forensic reports, and statements from witnesses. The case remains open. As of this recording, 67 individuals connected to the original location pings have been reported missing. The room has never been located. The photographs continue to arrive. This morning at 3:33 a.m., a notification appeared on the phone of a woman in Portland, Oregon. She had no connection to Megan Ashby, no connection to any of the missing. She had never been to the city where this started. Her address had never appeared in any location history. The notification said, "Megan's iPhone is near you." Her name was added to the list 6 hours later. The phone used to compile this report has begun receiving location alerts. The first appeared 17 minutes ago. It shows a device marked as Megan's iPhone. Status, active, distance, nearby.